As we celebrate Earth Day tonight, I would like to welcome all of you to Rails and Trails, a balanced forum on the development of Humboldt Bay. Our panelists tonight are Commissioner Patrick Higgins, Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District 5, Chris Rawl from Green Wheels, Supervisor John Woolley, the representative to the North Coast Railroad Authority, Marcus Brown, Timber Heritage Society, Spencer Clifton, Humboldt County Association of Governments, Brian Morrissey, Security National Bank, Mike Butner, Trails Trust of Humboldt, and it's Bittner, not Butner, I'm sorry, Bittner. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Membership in the League is open to all citizens 18 and older. Providing information to voters to help them make informed decisions is part of our citizen education program. This forum is an example of one of the ways we try to make democracy work. Many public policy issues can generate a good deal of emotion because of people's very diverse opinions. This is an informational forum designed to increase your understanding of this public policy issue. We hope that you will give the speakers your careful attention and refrain from any demonstrations of support or opposition during the forum. We will thank all of our presenters with our applause at the end of the forum. The format for our program tonight will be as follows. As moderator, I will introduce the topic under consideration, after which each speaker will have 5 minutes for an opening statement. Audience members will be able to submit written questions, which will be sorted by League members Bev Post and Amanda Windsor. Ushers Carol Masterson and Sarah Reed have cards and pencils and will collect your written questions if you put them up in the air so they can see where to get one from you. The timing for answers will be flexible, and I will determine that and announce it at each question. The timekeeper is Helen Andrews, right up here in front. At the close of the question period, each panelist will have a total of 3 minutes for a summation. The order of opening remarks was determined randomly and will be reversed for the closing statements. Now let's begin. The balanced development of Humboldt Bay must take into consideration many different issues, including, but not limited to, shipping, the railroad, fishing, the environment, the watershed, recreation, trails, wildlife, and aesthetics. We are pleased to have a panel of many experts represented here tonight. Our first speaker is Patrick Higgins, a third-generation Californian and a Humboldt County resident since 1992. 72, excuse me. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Humboldt State University and also did graduate studies in fisheries there. He's been employed as a consultant in fisheries and watershed science since 1988. Patrick was elected in November 2007 as the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District 5 Commissioner. Patrick?
Thanks, Bert. I guess I'll use the mic. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum, providing a civil discourse on what is sometimes contentious issues. And I think it's essential to democracy, so I'm very, very pleased to be a part of this. I am a member of the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District from District 5, which is equivalent to the 5th District of Humboldt County. Views expressed this evening, however, are my own, not those of the Commission, although I do believe they represent the views of the plurality of my constituents. Embedded in this evening's discussion is the question, what are our region's most viable economic development options? We should use positive visualization by all means to shape our future, but also objectively assess economic viability options if we want to make our vision a reality. I'll discuss rails and trails here in this 5 minutes, and then the future of Humboldt Bay in my concluding remarks. Let's take the thorniest issue first, and I'm batting lead off here. The viability of reestablishing rail service in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a strong emotional connection to trains, but I'm going to divorce myself from that because I want to discuss their viability as a business venture based on the best available information. Much of that information comes from Bay District funded studies. The ones that I think have the greatest substance are those by TB Marine. And their assessment of the North Coast Railroad Authority economic viability states that the railroad would only make money if there were 10 to 30,000 carloads of gravel that went south or to the docks every year. And otherwise it would lose $2 to $4 million a year between now and 2028. I will share with my colleagues up front here. And you can look this up on the internet, humboldtbay.org. Can containers from China and autos from Japan and Korea be the freight for our railroad? Not according to the PB Marine Humboldt Bay Revitalization Plan. It says we can't compete in the container auto shipping business because we're too remote, train shipping costs are too great, and there's too much time involved. And so that's even if the railroad were running. I suspect that the cost of reestablishing the roadbed in the Eel Canyon will come up later, so I won't dwell on that now. But I contend that the cost of restoring reliable rail service is more than we in Humboldt County have the political capital to leverage. And that's an important point. Light rail is favored by many of my utopian friends. They can see themselves sipping cappuccinos between Eureka and Arcata. But the small population base, again, means that they can't operate such a line at a profit. And in fact, it would detract from the viable mass transit option that we have, which is buses. So I'll digress for a moment and say, let's do those hydrogen buses. Let's do those hybrids, biodiesel-driven vehicles. Let's be innovators and invest so that we have a viable transit system because it's getting expensive. I'd like to see reestablishment of the historic railroad between Small Roundhouse and Arcata as an anchoring attraction for a museum complex. I think that Humboldt County's rich history should be celebrated. It celebrates our uniqueness. And if we become an area even more recognized for cultural preservation, then that'll be another means to attract visitors. So let me switch to trails. Gas, $4 a gallon, don't blink. It's going up. It's on its way to $5 to $10 a gallon. We need to move swiftly forward on a truly multimodal transportation system in Humboldt County that has a system of link trails not just around Humboldt Bay, but radiating out to its other communities. This is a least cost means of transportation, and it improves our quality of life. The money for development trails is available. Humboldt County is now in line for nationwide recognition and $50 million. If we can agree as a community on a strategy and viable goals. So that is our challenge. This investment in transportation will create jobs and building the trails and ultimately contribute to rebranding Humboldt County as an eco-tourist and recreation destination. Regional. That'll have major economic development benefits. My friend Greta Grecian was telling me the other night, in Boise, Montana, they've done rails to trails. The community benefits are enormous, including community health. And I recommend that we move forward expeditiously to protect the NCRA right-of-way, including a trail on the existing right-of-way along the shore between Eureka and Arcata. I think we should explore going all the way to Fort Tuna. Rails to trails conversion on the Annie and Mary. Supervisor Woolley, much to his credit, is working on that with the NCRA, and in fact that's a subject of discussion this evening at the Blue Lake City Council. I'll conclude. If the reestablishment of the railroad is 20 years away, then we're depriving an entire generation of young people of access to a prime recreational opportunity, and we're incurring something known in business as lost opportunity costs. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next we have Chris Wall, Executive Director of Green Wheels, an organization that advocates for balanced and sustainable transportation on the North Coast. With backgrounds in architecture and wildlife biology, Chris has worked on transportation advocacy issues since 2003. Helping to implement the Jack Pass Universal Bus Pass program for HSU, advocating for the creation of a Humboldt Bay Trail, engaging Caltrans on the 101 Eureka-Arcata Corridor Improvement Project, and more recently, proposing development of the bus rapid transit system strategies for transit in the Humboldt Bay region. He also serves on the Arcata Transportation Safety Committee. Chris?
Thanks, Bert. Thanks to the organizers for putting this event on, and to my fellow panelists for coming together to have this discussion. From my perspective, this is not a discussion of whether rail freight would be good or bad for our region. It is a question of whether it is realistic in the foreseeable future. Generating jobs is essential to our region, but unfortunately, under current circumstances, there is very little evidence that the railroad has any chance of bringing jobs to our region. I believe the continued effort to bring rail back distracts us from so many other feasible opportunities, and I am afraid that we will continue to waste our region's limited money, energy, and political capital on this effort. In addition to the well-documented geologic and economic challenges facing the railroad, recent political shifts outside of our control are adding new and significant roadblocks. The railroad is currently embroiled in a lawsuit with Nevada and Marin County. Whether the NCRA wins or loses this court case, it has attracted the political ire of forces much more powerful than anything we can muster up here in our little county. There is much more money, a higher population, and therefore more political power in Marin, and it is now mobilized against the freight railroad, especially when it is connected to Humboldt Bay. The court case was the result in part of the NCRA telling Marin County residents a different story than they told us. Marin was told repeatedly that the NCRA had no immediate plans to rebuild through the Eel River Canyon. We were told rail was returning by 2011. That estimate seems pretty unrealistic at this stage, but it opened up the NCRA to a lawsuit concerning segmentation of their project, an alleged violation of the California Environmental Quality Act. More importantly, the NCRA recently failed to win a Prop 1B grant to restore the railroad from South Fork to Samoa. Proposition 1B, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, transportation bond measure in California history, could not provide the funding to rebuild the railroad through the canyon, nor restore the shorter and cheaper section at the north end. These are just the most recent bullet points in the story of the decline of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. It was knocked out in the '64 flood, as was 101. It struggled back with some service interruptions, but was dealt its final blow in the '98 El Nino. If you do any hiking along the tracks in the Eel River Canyon, you'll begin to understand why it is so hard to keep this railroad open. The railroad runs through one of the most geologically unstable regions on the planet. Last summer, I hiked a 15-mile section between Fort Seward and Devil's Elbow. The destruction wrought by mudslides, slip-outs, and landflows was staggering. I recommend that anyone interested in the Herculean challenge of restoring the Eel River section of the railroad to hike the canyon and see for yourself what it entails. The FEMA estimated cost of restoring the railroad through the Eel River Canyon at $520 million. Inflation would bring that to $850 million today, and further damage that has occurred in the intervening decade might boost the cost to $1 billion. Some folks may be skeptical of FEMA's estimate and buy into the Brown and Root estimate of $250 million, which was a response to the FEMA report, and possibly another example of shopping for the number that the railroad boosters wanted to hear. Either way, the money just isn't there to repair this railroad, let alone maintain it once it is repaired. Meanwhile, we have heard from staff at the California Coastal Conservancy that agency could bring up to $10 million to fund a trail project between Eureka and Arcata, a trail corridor that was identified in the 2006 Regional Transportation Plan as having a high level of support. Following a rail with trail paradigm, we might be able to get from Arcata to Braycut with this money. Following a rail to trail paradigm, we could get all the way to Eureka and beyond. If the $50 million trail proposal that you may have heard about recently comes to fruition in 2 years, we will face a decision of whether to follow the rail to trail model and build out a somewhat complete regional trail system from Moonstone to Scotia, with branches connecting to Blue Lake, Manila, and other communities, or continue to accommodate a railroad that does not exist and will not likely exist anytime in the near future, thereby limiting ourselves to very few trail projects. Since the railroad has no identifiable source of funding, it makes no sense for our region to continue to waste money, time, and political capital on something that impedes things we could do now to generate jobs. I'd like to see us get beyond these railroad dreams and focus on achievable projects that will have a real and lasting impact on our economy and our quality of life. Trail system development is one such project. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Woolley, serving his third term on the Board of Supervisors. Among the appointments the Board has responsibility to provide the representative to the NCRA. When Dan Opalak decided he needed to step down in 2002, John asked the Board to appoint him, and he has been serving since 2003. Humboldt County has two appointments. The other individual serving is Charles Olivier. John?
Thank you, Bert, and also echoing Chris and Pat's comments about thanking Lee. I don't know who does your schedule, but to have the League of Women Voters luncheon just a few days ago and then having this, that must be a tasking thing on the whole league, but I appreciate the hard work that you all do. Also want to note that this week the Humboldt Bay Symposium is taking place, and some of these points will be discussed there, and I urge you all to attend. I would also like to acknowledge our former Assemblyman Dan Hauser is here today, who in part was responsible for making sure that we had the opportunity to try to restore rails we're working on today. And I know he can correct anything I say, so that's good to have Dan here. So in 1992, the state did purchase the rail line from Willis North, and in 96, a separate transaction added the railroad line from Healdsburg north to the NCRA Holdings and provided for a joint powers authority, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad Authority, to own the right-of-way from Healdsburg south to Shelville in Sonoma County, where the railroad then feeds a 12-mile short line through Napa County, which connects to the Union Pacific Main Line at Fairfield-Sassoon in Solano County. I'll give you that little overview for those of you not familiar, that this is a publicly owned corridor for rail purposes as was mandated by the state legislature, and the job of NCRA is to try and bring that back. And that's what we've been working on. And I'm just a short-timer in more ways than one, but at least by being on the board of NCRA, that's the goal that we've been approaching and trying to work towards. So I should go over now the current rail status of where we are. We also have a consent decree status requirement to clean up, since we now are public authority, for 9 sites. And we've used $2.9 billion to subsurface, to the subsurface, and now we're developing the plans for operating below surface to do the cleanup. We had a FEMA-funded program of $7.9, and that updated the capital assessment of the south end. We did some swing bridge repair, and we acquired the rail equipment, so we successfully closed out that grant in November of 2005. Now we've looked at the rails, over 315 miles that goes through the 4 counties that provides for a lot of different opportunities and challenges, and we've divided it into 2 divisions, the Russian River Division and the Eel River Division. The Russian River Division was approved for then the focus of attention, of which the Proposition 42 were then applied to, so that we can then begin the opening construct of that. We to date have done signal crossing contracts for $10 million, levee repair work with $1.2 million, as well as we brought some dollars back home here to do the King Salmon Repair Project, which is to repair the abutment down there on King Salmon for $690,000. But what Chris did mention is the Nevada lawsuit has caused us to put in abeyance for until we resolve the lawsuit, the timber bridge repairs and the trackway repairs. We've also initiated the geotech report, geotech analysis for the Eel River Canyon to determine then from that what is the feasibility, given that the capital assessment report of the canyon was done in 2002. We need that current information to start out the scoping work that is required of us to do the full EIR of the canyon, which we intend to do. The operating contract has been signed. That was a requirement of us. We have, and I mentioned this yesterday in the trail planning group, and I do want to correct this, is that it is on a 5-year segmented, not segmented, but sequential option that it goes for 5 years and then can be renewed for another 5, etc., out to about 45 years. And that the first option for the contractor is been able to then get that option started. We do have a commitment to trails. We have made a general commitment for rails with trails, and we've done that successfully already at Foss Creek and Healdsburg, which is about a 2-mile segment. We're working with the Annie and Mary portions, which have been gone back and forth to determine whether or not we still have control. We feel we do at this point. I am working with the City of Arcata for internal workings there, and with the Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit, we're working on that as well. So there are a lot of guidelines and planning activities that are underway, but our primary focus is to make sure we bring the rail back. All the challenges that Chris and others have mentioned We understand those, and we're working at those to be prudent because there's been about $100 million invested in restoring the rail. To give it up now would be imprudent and would be a waste of the taxpayer dollars already put in place. It's time for us to be able to measure all that and bring to the public something they can scrutinize and see whether or not it can work. And it does depend upon a lot of relationships which we intend to develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Marcus Brown. As the president of Timber Heritage Association, Marcus is working to create the Timber Heritage Museum and excursion train for the benefit and enjoyment of our local citizens and tourists. Through his conversations with the National Park Service concerning the designation of our area as a National Heritage Area about the redwoods and timber, he was sent an application for a technical assistance grant for trails. This started the ball rolling, and the Humboldt Bay Trail Team was created, which is working to find a way to get both the trail built while keeping the railroad for our excursion train. Marcus is a cyclist and trail user and worked in a bicycle shop in Southern California. Marcus?
Thank you, Bert. And I want to echo my appreciation for having a very civil forum because as a person that looks at the politics of our country, it bothers me a lot that we have people out there that want to inflame division and polarization and use that, and we have to end up doing that kind of a thing. And my own feeling is that there's ways to create win-win. I went through the Cascadia Leadership Program here in Humboldt County, and that was about trying to keep everybody working until you come up with a unique system solution where it works for everybody. And that's what I'm about, because I believe that both trails and trains are green transportation. I mean, the efficiency of trains is phenomenal. If you want to reduce our carbon output, both are important. So like I said, there is a way for both trains and trail to happen here. And what we need is to keep open minds and keep searching for a way to do that. And I wanted to, so this team was established and a consultant was hired, and a study was created for the Arcata to Eureka Trail. On the first page of the executive summary, it says, trail concept appears to have broad public support and stakeholder support. Of the 5 options developed, there seems to be little support for the status quo, and there's broadest public support for rail with trail options. I hear from a lot of people concerning the railroad, and there's different opinions expressed about the entire line, but what I hear is most everybody says, I'd like to see this tourist train happen. We recently had a strategic planning conference. We invited a whole lot of prominent people from the communities. Jay Parrish from Ferndale said, you ought to run that train from timber town to timber town, from Samoa to Scotia. And by the way, the train tracks go within a 1/10 of a mile of the Rockefeller Road down there. So there's tremendous potential here. To get right into some of the nuts and bolts of this thing, there's a lot of broad consensus that we can start building this trail from Arcata to the Braycut Marsh as a standalone project. This is not a difficult section. This could be accomplished. Where the difficulty comes in is from basically Indianola Road going down to Airport Road. That's the section where you're going along the Simpson Mill down there. It's narrow, there's not much room, and that's where the conflict comes in. I spent a bunch of time, talked to a lot of people, and I put together this thing that anybody can have that talks about what are the issues in that section. And basically, Fish and Game, there's a thing called the Fay Wildlife Refuge there, basically wildlife refuge, from Indianola Road down to Harper Motors. And Fish and Game really is not very excited about having a trail on the railroad grade right there. And because the birds come over and they nest or they hang out in the trees along the railroad tracks there. There's Humboldt State professors that are concerned about that. And I was told that really the best place to put that is in that section is on the east side of 101. Well, what started this was one morning I was driving to Eureka, and I'm looking over at the freshwater valley, and I'm seeing the sun coming up, and I'm going, this is beautiful. I look over to the right, and we got the mill and all this stuff, and I'm going, where would I rather have the trail as a trail user? And And so I started looking into that, and by golly, you know, there's a wide shoulder on the east side. I went out there and I pasted off today, just so I would have the clear facts. It's 40 feet wide. There's plenty of room. You know, our Caltrans rep said, well, you know, we really haven't explored that. And the consultant who did this report yesterday said, yeah, perhaps we need to look further at this. So in my opinion, this jump to we have to destroy the railroad to have our trail is a false choice. We don't have to resort to that kind of polarization. I believe we can be creative and we can have a solution where everybody wins. We all get what we want. I plan on living here until I die. I want to be able to go on these trails. Part of a National Heritage Area is a big, great trail system. I support it all. I want to see both the train and trail. I want to see us all win. I've lived here for quite a while, and like I said, I'm going to live here till I die, and I want this place to be great. That's it.
Thank you very much. Spencer Clifton will speak now. He is the Executive Director of the Humboldt County Association of Governments, and he's been involved in transportation issues and policy advisory for a wide range of developmental and proposed projects. Spencer?
Thank you. Once again, I would like to express gratitude to the league, the moderator, and the members of the public who took the opportunity to come out this evening and engage. Much like last night, it reminded me of the W.C. Fields line where he said, "Can't you fit that out for man or beast?" And I'm really glad to see that we do have a considerable level of interest from the general public. As the Executive Director of the Humboldt County Association of Governments, we're responsible for various planning and programming activities for the very wide and broad multimodal split of transportation users and modes throughout the county. These include streets and roads. They include transit. They include, by alliteration, some of the trails efforts. We are considered what I would like to think of as a non-conflicting, kind of a equal opportunity subsidizer, advocate, and proponent for all of the various modes. They all have their place and their rank and their value to the citizens. So anything that I would say tonight is not in conflict with any of the other speakers' positions, regardless of whether or not we have rail proponents or trail proponents, or both, and all the above. Several years ago, the association board directed staff, that would be me, to work with the North Coast Railroad Authority to try and procure their conceptual approval of development of a rails with trails project in the publicly owned NCRA right-of-way between Eureka and Arcata. Given that as my marching orders, I proceeded to attend and seek the approval of the NCRA for a shared use concept of their right-of-way for the multi-use trail. So it was quite clear, given their statutory mission and their position, that they did not oppose trails development in their right-of-way, but they hold fast to their given mission, and that is the restoration of rail service. And our efforts to try and develop a multi-use trails facility in that corridor are consistent with the NCRA mission and definitely not in opposition. We did work with Marcus in procuring the technical assistance from the Federal Park Service, who have been functioning as a facilitator and a collaborator in trying to address and identify the next steps for trails development in a multi-use fashion between Eureka and Arcata. Some of the very large challenges I've learned through the course of time to not refer to things that we find challenging as constraints, but to identify them as challenges. Constraint to me starts to sound like a large wall that we can't all get over, and a challenge sounds like something that with some collaboration and some joint teamwork that we might be able to address and meet head on and achieve some success. But some of the significant challenges in trying to develop the trail in that corridor rest with wetlands and environmental issues. They rest with some of the geometric limitations in and around the mill site. They rest with billboard issues, and they rest significantly with funding constraints and the funding challenges. We heard trails referred to as the least cost, some of the least cost developments. I'm not sure that that will always be the case. This particular corridor is quite expensive to develop because of the challenges that I just noted. I look forward to working with our partners in trying to meet and address our challenges, and I do look forward to I was going to throw the stop sign on. I do look forward to having a multi-use trail. I've lived in Humboldt County for a long time. It's been a wonderful place to raise my children, but like a lot of others, the export our best resource, in my case, is my children.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Brian Morrissey, the Senior Vice President for Security National Master Holding Company, which specializes in loan acquisition, servicing, and real estate investment. He's been involved in the development of Humboldt Bay, the waterfront, and the balloon track. His agency commissioned a trail feasibility study regarding this region. Brian?
Yes, my name is Brian Morrissey, and I do work for Security National Properties. And prior to working for Security National Properties, I actually worked for Union Pacific Railroad for about 10 years. Although I don't think we commissioned that trail study. We did. So I may have a little bit of a unique perspective here. And I thought maybe we should remember that for more than 150 years, railroads have been the herald for greater economic opportunity and prosperity. This country's history is built on railroads. In 1914, that herald came to Humboldt County. In 1998, that railroad left. I think that loss of that railroad has had a dramatic effect on our local economy. Today we've had a chance not only to revitalize our local economy, but to provide people with good jobs, many of which are union jobs with benefits and provide living wages. We can do this with a port on Humboldt Bay, served by a first-class railroad. A port that will be built using today's technologies, perhaps even tomorrow's technologies, and not burdened by archaic legacy systems that West Coast ports right now have. We have a chance to build and to show the world that shipping, whether by sea or by land, and our environment are not incompatible. That the economic prosperity that we desire does not have to come at the expense of our environment. I'll say that again. That the economic prosperity that we seek does not have to come at the expense of our environment. We are perhaps unique. Actually, I'm going to go a little off my little written records here, but anyway, rail lines are rare. Probably one of only maybe 100 or 200 people in the country have ever built in the last whatever years a brand new rail line to conversion of land. It's hard. Rail corridors are unique and special. That's why rail banking and rail trails were created. There's recognition of that uniqueness. And so we have the benefit of both having this corridor created and perfected for us, but at the same time, because of the challenges that we've been noted, we're given kind of a blank slate to work with. While the cost of this new port and rail system will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, the opportunities that they provide to our county, to our state, even to this country, are many, many times that number. We have the opportunity to design and build the first truly green port in the world. We have the opportunity to design and build a 300-mile rail line and trail system. We can build a rail line that not only cleans and restores our environment, but gives us a chance to experience it. One one of the other things I wanted to say was that, while rail lines right now, and you hear some of these reports about whether or not they're viable, they will be. Right now, the port expansions on the west coast of the North America are growing at between 4.5% and 8%. Most of the ports that are in existence today are projected to run out of capacity between 2012 and 2018. I believe that tonight we can begin a dialogue that shows that rails and trails are not competitors, but rather partners that together can provide both economic prosperity and a chance to experience our environment in a personal and enriching way.
Thank you. The last speaker for the opening remarks is Mike Bittner. Mike is a resident of Eureka and active supporter of trails and open space. He served 2 years on the Eureka City Trails Committee until its demise some 4 years ago. At that time, the Trails Committee had fulfilled its mandate to complete the waterfront trail and promenade document that outlines the available potential for a contiguous waterfront trail in Eureka. Since that time, Mike has been serving as a Eureka Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails Commissioner. In 2004, he was a founding member of the Trails Trust of Humboldt Bay, where he now serves as board president. Mike?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks to Lee for putting on this forum tonight, and thanks to all of you for showing up. I am here to speak on part of the Trails Trust of Humboldt Bay, and I won't be voicing my own opinions. I have several, maybe I'll get into it at some point. But for the most part, what we do is we're an advocacy group for not only the development, but also the use of trails in and around Humboldt Bay. And even recently, our purview is sort of stretched out further than that throughout the county, and we've been involved with the folks, the Annie Mary Trail and also the Hammond Trail. So what our purpose is to gather that support, the community members, and take it to the local agencies and the local governments and help them find ways to implement the trails and get people out there using them. One of our first projects was the Elk River Trail, which we helped the city find their $50,000 to do the original planning and all, and now that trail will be funded and built. And that's the trail that goes from the foot of Truesdale out to Herrick, and it'll be a full multi-use trail with restrooms at each end and usable by anyone with a bike, wheelchair, or just a pedestrian or bicycle. And that's the kind of thing we do. We get that support, find ways to do things, and look for the funding to help provide the community with better access to the outdoors and using the trail system. And as I mentioned in the bio, this is the report that was done through the Trails Committee for the Waterfront Trail and Promenade, which it basically ties all the loose ends together, both from all the way from Herrick to 101 exiting out of town going towards Eureka. And included in that as part of the trail is the waterfront boardwalk that exists now and dead ends on both ends. All of this trail structure is really part of that runs along the bay. Will be one time the middle section of part of the California Coastal Trail. There's great support from the California Coastal Conservancy for developing that trail and funding it. And that's what our motivation is kind of get that chunk of trail completed along with all the little pieces that might tie into it along the way. Certainly we're very involved in support of development of the trail between Arcata and Eureka. We do not take a position as an organization on the railroad. We're there just simply to try to get that trail the best way we can get it built between the two places. I have personal opinions about all those things. Again, like I said, I'm a representative of the Trails Trust of Humboldt Bay. And recently, last year, we sent a representative, one of our staff members, our only staff member, 4 hours a week, to Portland to go to a regional trails meeting, and that's where we found out about this $50 million grant that was available through the federal government that we worked with both with Eureka and now the county of Humboldt to get them to be the lead agency on that, and we're raising funds at this
answered. I will try to consolidate some of the topics and address them to the person that I think probably has the greatest potential to answer a specific question in the beginning. But each panelist will have a chance to comment on the question if he chooses. I will give you a chance in order. We're going to start with John Woolley, and these are a couple of questions that have to do with the NCRA. One is, does the NCRA have fee title to the entire right-of-way? And does the law specify that that right-of-way is for rail use only, or is it a transportation corridor? John?
Let's see, so first of all, do we own the outright line altogether under fee title relationship, or to the opposite, do we have a easement on top of land already owned by a private property? It's a mixed use. As we are concerned about, mostly in this room, probably here in Humboldt Bay, in fact, the rail line through the corridor is in that relationship. The other aspect goes to somewhat of the challenges that we're looking at as to if we were to abandon and then rail bank, has been suggested, to put into trail, whether or not that we could legally do that, given the mandate I spoke to in the authorizing legislation. There are some that believe that we don't have that ability. There are some that think that we should. There are some that think that we should then get clarification legislation going through. So I guess it's a mixed bag answer on that second question. The only way to get to that is through planning and development, which I believe NCRA is committed to do. And at this point, we are committed along that corridor to develop where feasible the ability for us to use the right-of-way, which wouldn't then get us caught up in all that stuff, dealing with legal and legislation maneuvers. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, and I will give a chance, we'll start with Mike Bittner. Do you have anything to add to that? No? Brian Morrissey? Chris Rawl?
I guess I would just add that that question definitely brings up some concerns about the contiguous of this right-of-way and keeping it in public domain. There is at least one landowner along the corridor between Eureka and Arcata who's claimed that after the 2 years that trains weren't running over his property, that easement reverted back to his ownership. I don't know how correct he is on that or not, but there's just definitely concern that in order to preserve this right of way, we should be putting it to public use and making sure that we have it used so that landowners can't take it away from the public use.
Thank you. Marcus, do you have anything to add? Patrick Higgins?
I do. There is precedent being tested or possibly set right now with the Annie and Mary Railroad, which is not an imminent target of the NCRA, and yet has been the target of the community for transportation corridor for trails. If this is possible for the Union Pacific or for light railroads on a realistic business decision, I think it should also be possible for the NCRA. And I think in part that the problem with the NCRA is that it's not run like a business.
Thank you. Spencer Clifton, any comment?
I would just like to add that that question, like many of the topics and issues that circulate around the railroad and the multi-use trail concept, generally conjures up significant more questions. And in order to lay the easement or fee condition to bed permanently, there has to be a full title search of all of the appropriate parcels of land that run along that particular corridor. It's my understanding that there are places where the NCRA does have an easement, and that some of those easements describe the general purposes for the operation of a railroad in a very broad fashion. But in order to fully determine what exactly the limitations of the easement or the fee title conditions are parcel by parcel would require a fairly complex title search for that property.
Thank you. John, I'm not going to let you have a chance right now because everybody's had a chance on this question. If you do have comments later, remember you do have a summation. Thank you. The next question, I'm going to start with Marcus Brown. The question is, please explain and comment on the term rail banking.
I don't know if I'm the right person to be asked that question, because I'm not totally clear about that issue myself.
Okay.
So actually, we're about, if we could have access to the tracks right now, we'd start running a train, so we're not wanting to bank it. So.
All right, well, I'll just go through the list then. Brian Morrissey, any comment?
Well, I can explain the rail banking concept. There's legislation on it because railroad corridors are so special, so unique. Special legislation by the United States Congress passed where you can rail them, you can actually protect those easements, you can do those type of things, and set aside that corridor for future use for the rail. Often there is an interim use trail, other type of thing, but the concept is that that corridor is protected for future transportation, particularly the rail use. That's what rail is. When we talk about rail link, setting aside a corridor for future rail use.
Thank you. Spencer Clifton, any comment?
I would definitely agree with Brian's assessment of rail banking, but I would like to add that it is typically associated with a rail property that has undergone abandonment for purposes of an operating rail program at that time.
John Woolley?
Building on what Spencer just said, that's true. Nancy Biter at Surface Transportation Board is the author of rail banking stuff, and is actually in a rewrite of it as well. That it's an abandonment and then rail banking procedure that takes place, and often requires then a manager to be in place to handle the operation if it's going to go to trails. And that the Surface Transportation Board sees this railroad as still active, it's in suspension. Therefore, it's not, even though there's been a 2-year lapse, we're still actively pursuing restoring it. That's why that 2-year rule wouldn't fly, because if it did, it would affect all the other rail lines throughout the United States, unless you take the active steps to go through abandonment and banking to protect the corridor for very transit purposes.
Thank you. Patrick Higgins, any comment?
Can I go after Chris? Rail banking, essentially, my contention is this railroad is not viable, will not be viable in the next decade, and therefore we should take a higher use and protect in the long term this corridor. There are cases in the east where Great Northern lines have been abandoned and then restored when there was a coal mine reopened. Or, so when there is a commodity, or when there is enough vision in our society to commit to railroads, which I personally favor. If we were Canadian, this wouldn't even be an issue. The train would still be running. If we were Japanese, it would be. But we're American in this day and age, and this is not in favor. And so if we hook our star to this, then we're going to be just awash in the backwaters here. So I think rail banking is the option to maintain rail options in the future.
Thank you. Mike Bittner?
Yes. I think one thing was missing, and I'd be glad to be corrected if I'm mistaken, but the rail banking also requires the restoration of the right-of-way to its rail use if it is given up as a rail banking and returned to rail again. So part of the equation in terms of funding is not only build on top of it while it's being abandoned and rail bank, but also restoring it to its rail use once it has returned back to a rail.
Thank you. Chris Rawl?
I would just say if and when it's restored back to its rail use. I agree with Pat that this is probably our best shot at preserving this corridor for future use if it indeed ends up ever being used in future use as a railroad. But in the meantime, we're really losing this big opportunity to actually have a trail, and we've already lost any use.
Thank you. This question, I'm just going to give each one one of you a chance. I don't know who has the best idea. We'll start with Spencer Clifton. How many $100 million are you willing to invest in the rail, and how much do you think it will cost?
Geez, I did bring a crystal ball along. I do know that historically the Association of Governments has attempted to provide resources to the North Coast Railroad Authority. However, the typical transportation revenue streams that stem from the federal and state fuel taxes are now kind of segregated from use by the Railroad Authority. I personally don't have a fortune of resources or access to enough resources at this point to fully restore rail services through the Eel River Canyon. I think it would have to be staged, and I think it would take a significant amount of time. Our region generates in 2-year windows roughly between $8 and $12 million in street and road and transit resources, and if we could rail in there as a competing mode, it would probably take a significant amount of time for any of those modes to deliver improvement.
Thank you. Marcus Brown?
Well, I think the best way to preserve the railroad is to put a tourist train on it. And I don't have the dollar figures. I mean, for the scenario of us running a tourist train, and what I'm not talking about, that's our whole thing. And our strategic planning conference said we should stay neutral on the whole thing. Just talk about our little part of this. We're about creating a museum and the excursion train operation. And to restore the railroad to a point where you would have heavy freight trains would take a tremendous rebuilding, but you can do a less expensive job, bring it up to the point where you could run a tourist train on it. And so I don't see. There is a document, there was a study done for our excursion train by this, it was a community development block grant with the city of Eureka, and there is a dollar amount in there for completely Cadillac restoration of the railroad for a tourist train operation. The bad thing about that is that's the Cadillac version. There's a lot of cheaper versions that we can do, and if we were able to get permission to then move forward on doing the work, there's plenty of examples where volunteers have gone out doing the tire replacement and bringing the railroad up to the point where you could run a tourist train on it, and you could stage it, segments moving forward. And I'm sorry I don't have dollar amounts, because every little scenario you would come up with is going to have a different dollar amount. But like I said, if I could get the rail authority to give us permission today, we'd go out there and start getting grant money and start at Samoa and start fixing the tracks and slowly extend the range of where our tourist train would go until we have a working operation, perhaps all the way down to Rockefeller Road. So that's where it looks. That's how it looks from my standpoint.
Thank you. Chris Brown?
Well, first I wanted to say that it's really good to hear Marcus talking about a standalone kind of sort of alternative approach for the Timber Heritage Association in terms of trying to get a tourist train running. I've been kind of concerned. I don't really have a lot of passion myself behind the tourist train, but I recognize that there is a lot of passion there, and that there's a lot of passion in this community for that project. And so in the past I've seen that business plan sort of predicated on the restoration of freight, and I just couldn't see how that was going to work if freight isn't coming back here, because I don't see freight coming back. In terms of the cost of restoring freight up to here, I can only say what the sort of numbers that I've seen in a couple different reports. The FEMA report that I mentioned in my opening comments, which is about, I think it's $520 million for the northern section, and that was in, I believe, '98. So the interest on top of that, or the interest, the inflation on top of that, and the increased damage that's occurred over the last decade would probably increase that amount. There is another number more recent that's
the question is, how much would you be willing to put into the rail, and what do you think it would cost to put the rail back in business?
Personally, nothing I would put into it, but as far as the Trails Trust goes, we'd be, any section of it that we saw opportunity to develop a trail on, we'd certainly include the cost of restoring it if it ever came back out of railway. And so that's...
Thank you. Brian?
I don't know how much it would cost to restore. Frankly, I don't think anyone knows. But I think it's safe to say that it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
I think the question should be, what does it cost us? Railroads are, the state of California is the third largest economy in the world. The United States is dependent upon and needs international commerce. Right now, Canada, someone mentioned Canada earlier, is building Prince Rupert, competitor to the ports here in our country. Mexico is looking at one as well. So while it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build, it will cost this county, this state, and our country far more if we don't begin to look at building a freight railroad to Humboldt County.
Thank you. John?
Well, from NCR's perspective, that's the excellent question to ask. But it's a process question. $100 million that we put into is purchase the line and put into the restoration of the south end. And that's a strategy that has been approved by Caltrans, CTC, and others. And that means that that portion of the line can be carrying out the mission that the mandate has provided. Now, how much more is needed? That's the process we're undertaking. And to pull the plug now is premature based upon the investment of the whole line. And that's why I think the comments pretty much are what we're hearing is something that we are taking in, and that's why we're doing the work we have to do to be a prudent public agency with the dollars invested. If we find that it's not feasible, then we know about rail banking. We know how to use it. Whether or not it can be deployed, I'm not sure. But that's a question that comes up in due time. We're not losing opportunities. We're still committed to developing trail options within the corridor. And we have so many possibilities just in Humboldt Bay that I think that we can help serve, that we're here to make that work. So I think we often get in these discussions and draw conclusions before we're finished with the analysis. And that's probably something I'll be harping on as I hear it periodically. And I understand the sensitivity analysis of the Parsons Breakerhoff, but we have to move forward because based upon what we've invested today, we've demonstrated that we can make things work. The price of fuel, where we're going in the society, as Pat was explaining, the vision of how to move freight and goods, and how to move people, all may be our future in a closer period of time than we realize. To go to rail banking means by the Alta person, the Alta firm that did the trail thing for us was a lot of expertise, said we have to make a 20-year commitment to rail banking. So if we go through that exhaustive experience and find that we're moving forward on trying to restore rail, then it would again demonstrate that it would be premature possibly until the analysis is in. I think NCRA has that job to do. It's a public entity. It's not privately owned. We're trying to build public-private partnerships, and that's our job. Over and over again, that's the message we have to try and get people to understand. And I know we're concentrating on the south end, but that's a strategy that is working. And if we go through the EIR process on the canyon, we'll have a lot more opportunities to criticize and raise the question of the FEMA dollars, which again, the FEMA report was asking for a permanent fix of the canyon. We're looking at what our capital assessment report brought in 2002 as a report that Chris was talking about, that we can then also make it operational and move towards a permanent fix over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Higgins?
Well, I just happen to have with me the infamous, much talked of FEMA report, 1998, $640 million. And I'm not a geologist, but I have I study geomorphology and geology, and there's 125 places in the Eel River Canyon where there are these things called rotational slumps and earthquakes, which may be a half mile or a mile in length and a quarter mile in depth. And the entire piece of real estate is moving, particularly when the train runs over its toe, which is where the slide goes into the Eel River. So now you cannot do a least cost fix and set up a viable railroad business if you're playing it by ear with every storm, because you haven't done the same level of engineering that we use for Highway 101. And I would also suggest that once this is completed, it needs a budget commensurate with Highway 101 to maintain it. Again, if we're Japanese, earth flow triggers train track loss, they put 500 guys out there, and it's a full employment project. This railroad's got to pay as it goes, and the numbers just aren't there. So I mean, I'm hearing a lot of like, gosh, we should have a railroad. I'm there. Where's the dollars and cents? Give me the bottom line. Show me the money. How is this going to work? It doesn't work. We don't have a society that has the values that many in this room espouse. The train is not going to be capitalized. I would put the number at $1 billion and consider it conservative. And it isn't my brothers that our country and our state, one of the richest in the world, does not favor this. But I'm a realist here. And I think there's a lot of kind of inspecificity. That's probably not a word. There's a lack of specificity from some of the other participants here that masks the real weakness here in terms of the assumptions, economic assumptions. I'm going to come back to that again and again and again. Because that's real money. We can leverage $10 to $50 million if we're all behind a museum complex. I would say scale down the historic railroad so that it becomes cost feasible. If you set it up on too wide a footprint, it'll eat you out of the house and home. I am strongly favorable in terms of the antique historic railroad, but I think that its economic viability is a matter of scale. Small.
Thank you. The next question has to do with CEQA, the review of the trail system and the ensuring public safety, human waste disposal, bird disturbances, issues like that for the trail. And because it's addressed about CEQA, and assuming that Humboldt County would be the lead agent for CEQA, I'm going to address this first to John Woolley, and then everybody else will have a chance to comment. So, John, would you like to comment about CEQA's role in all of this? Excuse me, before you start, I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this question. This is pretty complex, I think. And everybody will have the same.
Well, it is, in a sense, 2 questions in one. The CEQA application is really in a project description that requires us then to acknowledge and look at the project impacts. So the CEQA application is then to what project we've described, and it gives the public a chance to communicate back to the sponsors of the project as to whether or not the mitigations for that project have been lessened to less than significant. So one of the questions inside of this was, how does maintenance take care of itself inside of that? Well, that would have to be addressed during the project description. I think we're a bit far from that. I could say that if it's in the corridor arena, be it the 101, be it the Caltrans right-of-way or NCRA or both are public agencies that they will have to address that. I know the lead agency concept has been mentioned, and that's basically for us to take on the responsibility to acquire the funds so that we can then work with the given agencies, Caltrans, the 2 cities, what have you, in coming up with a game plan that we can feel they can then put into a project description that then would go through a CEQA process. At that point in time, all the questions that go into maintenance would be addressed, and that's the time and place to look at it. One thing we can look at is the Hammond Trail, for example, and to see how that's working, because because that's really a live example of what we want to work, but what faults does it have, how much use is going on, et cetera, et cetera. We want to thank RCAA, who's also here tonight, for developing that, and also they have a role in helping us with the project description.
Thank you. Next will be Spencer Clifton.
I would just like to iterate what Supervisor Woolley had just expressed, and that is that at this point in time, because you don't have a project that is fully described, you don't have any kind of preliminary engineering, I don't think you're ready to enter into the CEQA process. I don't think you're ready to enter into the permitting process. And the question begs a greater degree of specificity than has been applied to the multimodal trail concept at this point.
Thank you. Patrick Higgins.
The California Environmental Quality Act requires cumulative effects. What are the larger effects from a project? And where the railroad has been remiss is that it has considered only in sections the restoration of the railroad bed. And the issue here is, like, if you're going to restore the entirety, which is actually in this long-term game plan, then all of those things need to be addressed. And so that's kind of where we've sticking points. And it's if you're talking about the restoration of the industrial railroad, then the basis is freight, the freight is cargo, the cargo is the industrial harbor. So, these are CEQA's demanding. So if we're going to play this game, if that's your end game, then you have to tell us, if you're going to incrementally achieve that end game, then you have to tell us what are the consequences environmentally in total from those projects. So that's what CEQA's about. It's a theme. It's very exacting, but it protects the citizens of the state from unintended consequences and reviews that are only superficial.
Thank you. Mike Bittner, your comment?
Not specific to CEQA and that section, but as far as maintenance of trails, that's certainly one thing we take into consideration when we're looking at projects. How we're going about trying to help find funding for them, that maintenance is included in that scope. And then along with that goes safety on trails, which we also work with the community to develop safety groups to our users of the trails that can report problems with the trails back. That's specific to CEQA.
Thank you. Chris Earl?
A couple things, I guess, on the maintenance issue. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the community about building space districts and other kind of creative approaches to figure out if we do end up with a larger trail system, we're going to have to figure out a way to maintain it. So there's definitely an exploration going on with how we're going to do that. They think it can be done. The segmentation issue with CEQA that Pat was referring to is one of the central issues in the Nevada lawsuit of the NCRA, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out and what the result is.
Thank you. Marcus?
Well, I just pulled out the title here to remind myself just about the rail and trails. And, the experience yesterday, we had our trail team meeting yesterday. And there was an interest, we were talking about, okay, what is the first project we could move forward on to make a trail happen? And, it was described, well, the low-hanging fruit is building from Arcata to the Breakup Marsh. And Eric Nelson, who is the head of the U.S. Wildlife Refuge there, basically brought up, he didn't like some of the designs that are, in this study, and, well, that's what the Coastal Commission said they would really want to see. And he said, well, based on our geomorphologists, we don't like what is here. And there's going to be, the problem is, everything in this corridor is surrounded by wetlands. This is going to be a difficult project to pull off environmentally. In fact, my favorite quote is Spencer Clifton's that this thing has enough problems to kill 9 candles. And that was really early on when we started talking about this thing. I always remember that. The issue of between Indianola Road and Airport Road. I talked to Karen Kovacs with the state fish and game who takes care of that wildlife refuge, and we talked about that they're not concerned about trains or vehicles going by, but you put people on what is now the railroad corridor, and they're very concerned about, you know, that impact on birds. And as a photographer, I know that I drive up in my car and roll down my window to take a picture of a bird, and all of a sudden the bird sees me and goes, ah, I'm out of here, you know. And so there are some, I mean, it's there's going to be a lot to it, and as I've said, we have to collaborate and find what is going to work here for all concerns.
Thank you. Brian? You're okay, no comment. All right. Then we have several questions here that are directed to a specific person because of the idea in the question. So I will start with you, Brian, for this question, but anybody else will have a chance after Brian speaks. The question is, has the failure to gather support and receive state funding for railroad improvement and development been a contributing factor in the delaying of the development of the Marina Center project?
No. To the best of my knowledge, they're completely unrelated. The Marina Center project is on a course that is its own course. The city now drives that bus and has for some time. The railroad failures or not, I'm not that aware of, but I don't know any relationship to those two.
Okay. John, do you have any comment on that? Mike?
No.
No. Spencer?
No, I'm going to pass on it.
Patrick?
Could you repeat the question?
Has the failure to gather support and receive state funding for railroad improvement and development been a contributing factor in the delaying of the development of the Marina Center project?
That was Brian's question. No.
Yes, that was Brian. No? Okay. And Marcus, any comment?
I'll just say that I wish, my wish is that we could rebuild the original beautiful train station on its historic site, which is part of that property. As an intermodal transportation center, which I think everybody at this table will probably support. Sorry.
Right. We have a question which has to do about the feasibility of the rail in terms of the cargo. And we're going to start with Chris. There are a couple of things. What's feasible and realistic in terms of what could be hauled, and do we have anything other than gravel to export?
Well, I mean, from what I've seen in terms of various business plans, there's gravel from Island Mountain. In the more recent Proposition 1B application for the standalone railroad from South Fork to Samoa, the idea was for, well, we can only speculate that the idea was for gravel extraction out of the Eel River, going down to the port and being exported out of the river. But obviously there's also ideas behind some kind of container port connected to the railroad to relieve port congestion. Yeah, that's what I know of our plans.
I didn't say we are back to 1 minute for this question. Patrick?
Well, I hate to seem like Ross Perot, but I'm going to pass out another chart. That is, the only segments growing on the West Coast in terms of the shipping trade are containers and autos. Revitalization plan, PB Marine. Port access, even assuming rail service is restored, makes Humboldt County competitiveness for cargo very poor. The summation is also the same for autos. And this is the revitalization plan. You can download it on the web. And I'm having a little trouble sharing Brian's enthusiasm at the other end of the table because these are daunting figures. There isn't, and the shipping trade is not thriving. The shipping trade is hitting the wall with the Chinese trade. It's declining rapidly. And if you ship a container into Prince Rupert, by the time it gets to Humboldt Bay, that container that hit Canada is in Alberta or Chicago. We cannot compete in this shipping trade, and we should not pursue it as a viable business enterprise.
Next is Marcus.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, historically, timber is what got shipped out of here. We have a locomotive, I live in Arcata, we have a locomotive sitting at the Humboldt Lakeport plant, and right now, that business trucks their stuff over to Reading to put it on the train. Our Vice President Barbara Groom is sitting back there. She ships her beer out of here to a place that she can put it on the train. Because train transportation is cheaper. Humboldt County has a real problem with its transportation. There was an Amulet made heavy equipment in Arcata. They left the area because transportation was a problem. Timber costs more coming from Humboldt County than from Seattle because we don't have train transportation. It's energy and cost savings that makes businesses want railroads. So it's not just about port and containers, in my opinion. There's a lot of different things here.
Thank you. John?
The question is related to some degree to the port, which is Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation District, which we are in partnership with to a certain degree. And we're dependent at the rail line to see what we can ship out or ship in. And that's dependent upon shippers that come to bear. The Prop 1B proposal, it was poor timing just by the nature of the beast. We all supported Prop 1B because of the infrastructure needs in the state, but we frankly weren't ready, and that the best shot we could give is for just the north end. The north end, however, was able to demonstrate that the operator could make it, but it wasn't with Island Mountain, which is hard rock, but it was with gravel that is being extracted, that is available, and there is surplus gravel that could go to other locations. So it was looking at the port to be a barge center so that we could hook up and make that work over time. Whether or not that's funded, that still has some viability on a business model. And I'll just leave it at that at this point.
Mike?
Yeah, I have a comment, and this is because I am also a student of the railroad a little bit, and I follow those things and read a lot about it every day, and have followed the development of both port issues, both at Oakland, Long Beach, and the proposed new mega terminal in Mexico, and Prince Rupert, and other things. And Oakland's not at capacity, and as a fact, they just added the capacity with Port Stockton, where they're going to do some more shipping out of it. And so in Coos Bay, they just kind of stopped the progress on developing a container port there, and they only have 130 miles of rail, 2 tunnels that needs to be repaired, but the railroad will not continue operating it, even though there's local shipping and potential for container ports. So the issue that Pat brought up, I think, is right now the timing is not the greatest time. Perhaps in the future there's different shipping, but at this moment I don't think there is enough product to ship.
Thank you. Spencer?
I would just offer that I believe the NCRA and Harbor District application for the CMIA program probably had some technical issues. There were a lot of the existing ports throughout the state of California that demonstrated that they had active freight corridor and cargo movements, and I think that handicapped some of our competitiveness because of the fact that we weren't moving significant volumes and we weren't going to be rendered as competitive. I do know that historically, goodness, maybe in 1975 there were 60,000+ car loadings out of the NWP when it was operated as a subsidiary of Southern Pacific. 90 cars is a mile, and so there was virtually 2 miles of rail products a day leaving Humboldt County.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, a couple things. In answer to some of my colleagues' comments here, rails are doing enormously well. Railroads are one of the hottest stocks on the market today. They regularly, for those of us who sold their stocks some time ago, annoyingly seem to hit a new high every other week. When I left the railroad in 2003, my stock was at $62. I think it's now $135. ports. As for Prince Rupert is a single shipper port. Costco is the only guy who comes in there. I have 30 seconds left, so I have to be quick. Right now, Humboldt is closer to the Asia than the major ports south of us. Those ports right now currently experience 3 to 7 days on-dock time because of congestion. Any type of disadvantage that we have in terms of timing, in terms of shipping, those type of things gets eaten up right there. We may be a day or two behind in terms of shipping, 3 to 7 on average below. I think that the railroad is not coming soon. I think it will take some time. And by the time that we start right now, the demand will be there.
Thank you. The next question is specifically directed to Patrick Higgins, and I'm going to ask it because I'm very curious. Can you elaborate a bit about Samoa Roundhouse to Arcata?
Well, I believe that I went to the strategic planning meeting for the Timber Heritage Site, and I believe that the railroad could be an anchor for a museum complex in Samoa. The roundhouse converted to its original working use. If we are to create a national heritage district around the bay, then we can celebrate our history and have a focal point where people can kind of come as a tourist attraction. And I think if we all share a vision like this, then we could get 10, 20, maybe even $50 million in terms of the capitalization in the longer term for this vision. But if we don't unite behind some vision of this nature, then we will not succeed regionally, politically, because we're small in numbers. So we have to be focused. So I think that is an appropriate use for the site. The Samoa Town Plan immediately adjacent is a model community. I think it's incompatible with large-scale industrial development, and that something along the lines of a museum complex would be more appropriate for them.
Thank you.
Now, this is not the views of the Heritage. I told you that.
Thank you. Marcus, your turn.
Well, I'll follow on the heels of that. And a person from the Partnerships Office of the National Park Service came out here, and I showed him around. Samoa. He said, "My God, the amount of historic fabric here is just phenomenal." And we have all these historic buildings, all this stuff around here that we couldn't tear it all down because we didn't have the money to replace it. But as a result, we have so much intact historic stuff in this area. And Timber Heritage Association has this massive collection of timber history artifacts that put together, we could put back together with all our stuff, this historic site at Samoa, and it will be a national attraction along the lines of Colonial Williamsburg. And it really is a phenomenal diamond in the rough here.
Okay. And the next time, let me find my Spencer.
I have no response.
No response. Brian?
No.
Okay. Chris?
Pass.
And John?
Yeah, I too attended the strategic planning session for Timber Heritage Association, and I've given the marching forward of the Samoa town itself and how this could fit in. It does give you a vision of a tourist attraction that I think will lend itself well. Timber Heritage Association is already looking at some of the track repair stuff between Samoa and Manila, for example, to put on some sprinkler type activity that would be kind of a demonstration of that. NCRA sees that as a benefit and is open for business models and business plans that can come to it, so that if it can demonstrate how it can work, then we're ready to receive and to work with that model. So I think it's a work in progress, but we are encouraging it to take place.
Thank you. Mike, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do, because I think that thought of the tourist grant from Samoa to Arcata fits well into the perspective of the Trails Trust, because we believe that trail from Arcata to Eureka running the 101 corridor somewhere either on the right or wherever is a much more desirable trail than trying to go the other
Thank you. The next question, I'm combining several questions. There were a number of them that have to do with jobs and tourism, the kinds of jobs that might be impacted by the tourist train or trucking not having quite as much to do if the rail is put into use and so forth. So you're all going to have a chance to answer this, but we're going to start with Marcus. Would you comment about jobs and so forth as you see it?
Okay. Well, what's interesting, on the news the other night, I saw that even though a lot of sectors are down, healthcare and tourism are the two that are actually growing right now in Humboldt County. So that's where the jobs are being produced. We get characterized in tourism as being low-wage jobs. And yes, there are a lot of those, and for all the reasons that we need other industry, I support other industry. However, if you look at unemployment in different sectors, kids, youth, has one of the higher unemployment rates. Getting summer jobs is an important thing to have. In addition, an operation like the Timber Heritage Museum would have, good paying jobs in the year-round sector of maintaining the equipment, working on the train and so on. So you would have the heavy equipment type people making, good living wage jobs, and then you'd also have the summer seasonal jobs too.
Thank you. Mike, would you like to comment on that? No? Patrick?
I think just as in biology, in the economy, in diversity is stability. I think we have to explore every available, viable economic development option. But I think also that we need to take a hard look and cut our losses in some business ventures that will not be productive. I was in small business, and it's not always an easy thing to do, but if you don't, if you're in private business, you lose a lot of money. If you're in public business, then it requires continuing subsidy. I don't think that the port jobs and the industrial railroad jobs are a reality. I think some of these other options are much more tangible. And that as we move forward, light industrial around the bay, shipbuilding, shipping of appropriate scale, those are all viable options. The energy business offshore here, PG says $300 million might come to our area. So, if we keep our eyes open and explore these things, we can thrive.
Thank you. Chris?
I think when thinking about how to generate jobs and improve the economy in our region, it's important to think about what's the most cost-effective approach. One of the places that I go to look to sort of hone my thinking about it is the Prosperity Report and some of the other reports coming out of that group, the Targets of Opportunity. And when you look at some of those reports and the general theme of what's running through that, you see that the railroad just doesn't look like something that's really going to support a lot of those best opportunities for growth in our economy. Briefly talking about the trail and how that can boost our economy, it's estimated that it could provide a boost of about $3 or $4 million per year in tourism. And then considering the amenities, having amenities like that attract talent to also improve our keeping talent and keeping talent here that can generate business like in information technology issues.
Thank you. Spencer?
Well, I believe that we have seen what has been traditionally a resource-based economy. For some reason, mankind seems to be able to sort of beat down the natural resource-based economies. We seem to be able to either out-harvest or out-fish or out-grow, or it doesn't matter whether it seems to be coal or gold or even agricultural soils. I think that we need to recognize the orders of magnitude and what pieces of our economy can be sustainable and to focus on those areas.
Thank you. Brian?
I think that jobs in Humboldt County are important. I think jobs from the tourism industry and working on heavy machinery and those type of things are great. But I think one of the things that Humboldt County needs are good jobs. And I think those good jobs will come, at least in part, with the return of the railroad. The is not, and I want to be clear, I don't think it's the railroad or the trails. I think it should be both. But the railroad not only generates its own jobs, but like industry, I heard earlier, can take advantage of the transportation costs. It allows us to interact with our national and international, because if we have support, markets, and allow us to keep jobs and industry and entrepreneurship that happens here in Humboldt County, here in Humboldt County. And so, I don't suggest that there's a better job for workshops. I think those kids need summer jobs. But I think also that the railroad is one of the best opportunities for long-standing living wage, excellent jobs. I have 15 seconds left. I think the railroad represents one of those great opportunities for Jewish not to continue to explore.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I think trails, as much of what we're supposed to talk about tonight is hinged on rail trail connections, is actually a quality of life aspect that creates a value added to the whole area. So it's not a job reducer, but it creates a better form of economy because people who want to move here see that. Rail, on the hand here, has been criticized, has got to go through the business modeling to demonstrate whether or not the criticisms have any merit, and that's what we're embarked on. I think the targets of opportunity, which I greatly support, have inside of it, if you will, 6 different industry clusters that some of them can use the railroad. In fact, when we talk about the Richardson Grove issue, some of those same firms, from dairy, beer, for example, if they could see the rail, they also could see some benefits for shipping. However, that's not put into a business model yet. To critique it without the business model in front of us is premature. I think that's what we have to do from a public sector standpoint, is to make sure we produce that data so that jobs that can come from that analysis are demonstrated. We don't know that yet. We'll have to take care of that as the process continues.
Thank you. The next question has to do with subsidies, and it asks if the railroad should be responsible for stabilizing the gorge with landslides that were caused by clear cutting. Should that be subsidized by the people? And does Highway 101 pay as it goes, or is that being subsidized? I think they want a comparison between the highway and the railroads and the subsidies and so forth. And we will begin with Mike.
Out of my realm, so I'm sorry.
Okay. Chris?
Well, for me, that kind of just brings up the question, can we subsidize 2 facilities running between here and the Southlands? It seems likely that a railroad is going to have similar costs to the 101 in terms of maintaining it. Can we do both? I don't know that we can right now. So.
Thank you. John?
As to the slides, I think Patrick used the FEMA study to demonstrate that, as well as the capital assessment report that we have that was developed in 2002. And then you add to it the current geotechnical research that's going on to demonstrate what the slide material looks like, and what we can do about it, and then come up with numbers that we can say whether or not it's feasible compared to other infrastructure uses. That's the process that we're embarked upon. Many people do argue, or let's compare ourselves to the 101 situation as being compared. If we remember that we're looking at a high price of fuel, we're looking to try and move goods within a whole region that's 300 miles. And that if we can figure out a way to do that that's cost comparative, then I think we'll be better off. But we don't know that yet until we go through that process, which we're embarked upon. And we're readily accepting all the criticism. We just have to take on this process to demonstrate it and to be able to take care of it. I should add that we're working with Fish and Game to see if we can work on fish passage barriers now, as we want to assess that as well. I forgot to add that into some of the other work dealing with slides.
Thank you. Spencer, do you have a comment?
I would only harken back to, in my opening statement, I think I mentioned that government is an equal opportunity subsidizer for all the various modes. We subsidize public transit to the tune of 70%. We subsidize Amtrak across the country to the tune of 50%. We subsidize virtually everything that we do. The bicycle pedestrian systems that we have are all subsidized. We have a significant funding stream from federal and state fuel taxes for the state highway and local street and road system. That's an underfunded system. It is considered a pay-as-you-go concept, but it is not quite a complete pay-as-you-go because we have not increased fuel revenue streams over the last 20 years. We lost money against inflation, and I think if we treat rail in the NCRA in the public arena, I think that there are subsidies that should be assumed.
Thank you. Brian?
It's important, I think, to remember that this rail line was built, in 1898-ish to 1914. So the technology, the engineering, those type of things, those type of processes used, 19th century technology. It is 2008, and we're not going to start this year. And so when we look at, when the NCRA looks at stabilizing landslides, all of those type of things, we will be employing, hopefully, 21st century technology. We'll have skipped 100 years with the technology there. And I would hope and expect that those new processes, new engineering techniques, a better understanding of how the road works will allow us to build a railroad that is self-sufficient.
Thank you. Marcus?
Yeah, I'd like to talk from a philosophical standpoint of somebody that's got his first train set at 9 months old and has been involved with the railroads ever since. This country, every form of transportation is subsidized. The government pays for the roads, the airports, for the waterways, yet we have a history of railroads paying for themselves. Now, in this country now, because of the transportation gridlock that we have, the railroads went through decline. They are now in a growth mode. The tracks are full. The railroads are trying to figure out how to cram even more trains onto the existing tracks. It's because trains use so much less energy. There's the economy of all their different economies make them the cheapest, most energy efficient way to move things. And it's that price that makes everybody put stuff on trains. In Europe, the trains, well, we're the only industrialized country that doesn't have a government-run, subsidized rail system. And I'm going to Italy in 2 days. I'm going to go ride European trains, man. It's going to be cool. And we just have this thing of, we don't subsidize trains here.
Thank you. Patrick?
Well, clear cutting actually has little bearing on the instability of the inner gorge of the eel proximal to the railroad. There may be a few cases where that has actually been the causal mechanism. However, what has triggered the failure of the inner gorge of the eel is the water and the sediment entrained in the eel rising to inordinate levels, to where it goes up to the base of these huge landslides with mountains moving and initiates movement. Once those are in motion, they tend to remain in motion. The train driving across the toe being a triggering mechanism. This is something where, if this was Japan, each of those gets a bridge. The 21st century technology is here. It costs a bundle. It's a Confusion Hill Bridge times 125. I mean, it's like you mess with these landslides and you drive trains over the toe. I've been on the railroad tracks near River Creek below Dos Rios and watched the train tracks in 1995 undulate as a freight train crossed the bottom of the slide. And you can see the scarps at the headwater of the slide, or the headwater of the slide a quarter mile away. This is not small things in motion. This is huge masses. It requires enormous efforts.
Thank you. I hope we might be able to sneak in one more question, but in the interest of time, we will have to stop with the questions now and give them a chance to give their summations. However, for your panelists, I'm going to give you a few of the topics that we have not yet been able to cover. having both the rail and the trail, bicycle use, scrap value of the existing rail line, how the government agencies represent the will of the people for trail or rail, maintenance of the trail, the ADA requirements on the trail, the Native American concerns about the prosperity of our region, timeline for putting the rail back together, the tracks, are they viable, any of the tracks viable right now, or are they scrap metal? The fact that other tourist trains struggle, such as the Skunk line, and the billboards along that track. So if you don't have enough to say in your wrap-up speech, you might address one or more of those little questions. So we will begin with Mike.
Yes, if we could get those people who are in need of ADA compliant trail system to go along with those people on their bikes, take a look at the trail, which I'll find a way. I was just trying to be facetious, but if I could wrap everything up into one, it would be wonderful. But I think really what I've learned here is a lot from all these people who are so kind to come and share their information with us. And I think from my perspective, what is really important to us is developing these kind of resources for walkability, bike riding, transportation. And here in Arcata, it's a critical issue for those people that want to ride and get between towns. And I think that going forward, it's going to be a very important issue for our community, as well as those who might think trail will be the same thing, because it's the interconnectivity. It helps those people who need to get exercise, it gets families out, it gets tourists out, and our group, the Trails West of Humboldt Bay, supports nothing but full multi-use trails that are ADA compliant and to accommodate bicycles, and that is our goal. And if you're interested in being part of our organization, you can visit us at trailstrust.org and put some support behind the trails. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brian, you're next.
As I said at the beginning, I do not think that rails and trails should be competitors. Rather, I think they should be partners. Partners that allow us to take advantage of the economic opportunity and prosperity that industrial rail brings, but also the opportunity to take advantage of the quality of life issues and the connections that Mike just spoke about. I want to address a few things here. One, this concern that the rail is not viable. Prince Rupert was a new port that was built and it's viable. That same model we can use here in Humboldt. The rail, while certainly it needs millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of repair, we should do that. The port also, those two things connected can create great viability, great opportunity for not only us, but for generations to come. There's been a lot of talk about the economics. I believe, I don't think I'm way off base here, there is the growth that's coming in imports and exports will exceed our ability to do that. We have a choice as a county, as a state, and as a country, whether or not we are going to allow that business to go through the Panama Canal, to Mexico, to Prince Rupert, or stay here in the United States. My belief is it should stay here. Those dollars, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not it's physically possible or feasible. Using 8th or 19th century technology, that railroad operated for nearly 100 years. Is it going to be expensive to fix? Yes. But if we are using this 21st technology that we talked about earlier, it will last for far longer than 80 years. And so, I guess I would come back full circle. The railroads have historically been the heralds of greater economic opportunity and prosperity. If we were together in a partnership where we provide trails and the economics associated with industrial rail, I believe that if we start now, we have the opportunity to be successful.
Thank you. Spencer?
Well, I would like to point out that I believe that all the been primarily focusing on rail and rail with trail, and we've talked a little bit about harbor. These are transportation modes which represent very broad community interests. They also all have significant community assets and benefits for the community at large. I think that working with our Trails Planning Group and trying to develop a multi-use trail project, including Eureka and Arcata, sharing the right-of-way, work with the North Coast Railroad Authority, respects their mission. I would like to think that our community could get behind the larger concept of our projects rather than having half say one and half say the other. I think that we ought to practice project delivery concepts that are inclusionary rather than exclusionary. I think it's to the benefit of our overall community. I think if we all line up together behind project delivery rather than exclusion, we have a greater opportunity for competitive grants seeking, funds seeking, and attention from our elected officials in Sacramento. And I'd like to express my gratitude for everybody who came out this evening. And I personally look forward to continue working on the multi-use trails in conjunction with the North Coast Railroad Authority. I think that it would generate a significant community asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcus?
I want to also thank everybody here for this opportunity to have a real civil discourse in which we all got to express all the different points of view here. I do appreciate that because, like I said at the beginning, the whole polarized shock jock thing, I really don't like. And I wish we could all sit down and have civil discourses like this more often, honestly. I want to talk, what was brought up was the amenities. You know, trails are definitely amenities, and I really hope we get that $50 million because truly I would like to see what I'm hearing about with this huge trail network. Similarly, when the feasibility study was done for our museum, the consultant talked about cultural amenities, and good museums and things like that are also part of an amenities package that does help attract good quality people for our businesses. So again, that's why I say we need both, we need it all, we need win-win. And so we need, I mean, that's the bottom line for me. We need to be win-win. We need to figure out a way, in the Cascadia Leadership Program, they talked about having a group of people trying to solve a problem. And you sit them all down, and they keep talking about it, and they finally get just sick of it, and they get to the groan zone, they call it, where people are just sick of it, and they just want to get the heck out of there. And you just keep on pushing until finally somebody comes up with something really creative that solves the problem. And if nothing else, that's what I got out of the Cascadia Leadership Program, is don't give up, get through the groan zone, and come out the other side with a great solution that really serves the most number of people. And I guess that's it.
Thank you. John?
Well, thank you, Bert, and thank you to the League again for sponsoring this forum. I too agree that it's been beneficial. From my perspective, as a lame duck, short-timer, lightweight, whatever you call me these days, I should say I could be risk-averse and get off the NCRA, but I think I profess to be a progressive leader, and I believe that when we have 300 miles of corridor that we have to be responsible for, my job to serve on NCRA is to make sure that we analyze it correctly and do the job that's required based upon its mission and mandate that's been handed down to it, because we, the people of California, own it as a rail corridor. So to get to the bottom line on that basis, the criticisms that have been waged are being absorbed into the process. It's not that we're trying to ignore them, but we also have this mandate to get rails going. Some of the questions that weren't asked but still remain on the table are falling into that process that will have to be answered. That is, to what degree can we then have a business model that will work on a publicly owned rail corridor? And it's a private-public partnership that makes that work. For example, I look at it much like airports. We provide a publicly owned infrastructure for privately owned use that we all benefit from. Much the same could be seen of the trains, and we've gone through a lot of it already. So the process by which we have to go through is transparent. We do accept challenges. We are working on the Nevada suit. We feel confident that we can demonstrate our position as we move to the appeals court on that. But we'll see. And I came on this as a kind of a skeptic myself. But I believe that we have to be able to make sure we take care of that possibility as best we can, because again, we have about $100 million invested in it. And if we don't do it correctly, and we find out a little bit later that in fact it could work, especially with the kind of changes going on in our international economy, then I would agree with the day that we didn't take the chance and the opportunity to make sure we examined it fully, given the criticisms and the opportunities all at the same time. Just as a sidebar, we still recognize that in the 101 corridor, there are billboards there that have exhausted their lease arrangements. We're working and negotiating and taking some of them down. Some of them are not, in fact, owned within our fee simple land, as was discussed earlier, that we can't deal with it, but we are moving forward and taking care of this. And so I would say that we are committed to trails. We're working on a matrix approach throughout the whole Humboldt Bay area. There's no doubt about it. We want to use our corridor where we can, but we can't give up our mission and commit a 20-year rail banking approach until we exhausted all the analysis that we have to go through, which is going through the process right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris?
Yes. Fairly soon after moving to Humboldt in 2000, I began looking at the abandoned railroad track west of the 101 along the Arcata Bay, and wondering why it had not been converted to a trail as I had seen in other communities. Over the course of several years, I have heard the arguments for why the NCRA must be steadfast in pursuing what I view as unrealistic. I'd like to address a few of these arguments in the time I have left. Number one, it's the NCRA's mandate to restore rail service. Because the mandate doesn't say when or that you have to be unreasonable about the timeline, I believe rail banking is an appropriate tool to preserve the right-of-way for the future and thus fits the mandate. But I'll set aside this argument and add this. When I was a kid, my mother used to ask me, if someone told you to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you do it? Hiding behind the mandate to restore rail service is a little like jumping off the bridge because you were told to. If the mandate doesn't make sense given the realities on the ground with the data we have available to us, work with the state government to change the legislation into something more realistic. Number two, rail is a more efficient method of moving freight, as Marcus mentioned, I think a few other people mentioned. This is true in certain conditions, but barges are even more efficient than rail, and we have existing infrastructure supporting barge shipping that is comparatively cheap to maintain. So in kind of a peak oil scenario, I think that's likely what we're going to be doing. Number three, we must exhaust all funding options before restoring rail before giving up. I'm at a loss for what is defined as a funding option at this point. The recently rejected Proposition 1B grant application leaves the NCRA with no identifiable funding source unless you consider the monies available for trail development and what that could do to shore up the infrastructure. Number four, those trail advocates are trying to destroy the railroad. The railroad has been destroyed by flooding and unstable geology. Trail advocates are simply asking to use a public right-of-way that is not in use. Rail banking would allow for the return of the railroad if and when it becomes realistic. Please stop accusing us of wanting to destroy something that does not exist. And to that, I just want to add, when you consider a rail-to-trail option of $4 million to build between Eureka and Arcata, that's going to pay for itself in just a few years in terms of the economic benefits. If we do have to rebuild it as a rail-to-trail, if rail eventually does come back, which I'm skeptical of, we can do that. But it's worth it to get that trail in place now. So I'd really like for my kids to come use the trail before they're 18. Anyway, it's time to get real, and thanks to everyone for participating and for the league for putting this on.
Thank you. Patrick?
Well, Brian shouldn't have dwelled on Prince Rupert because there's salmon in the Skeena River next to the tracks coming out of Prince Rupert that go to 100 pounds, and I'm an expert. I've hooked well over 65. The Canadian Railroad runs by the town of Terrace, 80 miles from Prince Rupert, at about 80 miles an hour. If you're not careful, you get squashed like a bug, because the rails are welded, because the climate is so extreme that if you didn't do that in the winter, they would separate. So this is a billion, in just probably from Terrace to Prince Rupert. It's going across the Canadian Rockies. And the Canadians don't bat an eye, and they never question the subsidy. The ports to the south of us, it might take longer to get there, but then, oh, that's right, there's millions of people who could buy the goods. So you can't stop the expansion of the Panama Canal, so why are they going to come into Eureka when they can drive it to New York? And will the China trade continue to rise geometrically for the next 10 years? I hope not. And I don't think this is Humboldt's destiny. This is like a piece of the China trade. This is like the ultimate homogenization of our culture. We don't want to do it. And I won't even touch the environmental effects, which are at the wrong scale for our bay. I would rather stress restoring our bay. We have amazing expertise here locally. We are practitioners. Let's get the grants. Let's fix the bay. That creates jobs along the way, and it stimulates the economy. The recreational potential for Humboldt Bay is just very tapped. We've got Woodley Island, we've got the Eureka Boardwalk, we've got the Arcata Marsh, but we need to expand on that. The Bay District, in partnership with RCA, is designing self-guided water trail routes. That'll draw tourism. We've got people can even use skull boats and things like that. This is another, economic development related to tourism. We have to maintain existing commerce, don't get me wrong. The evergreen pulp mill, commercial fishing, we need to maintain access to the bay and the dredge. But we also need to explore every other viable economic development pathway, light industrial. I went through them earlier, so I won't do the same litany again. But I do think, I'm going to touch on one more time, that the railroad right-of-way, it's been 10 years since it's run. I'm concerned that the reconnection, if it drags on another decade, we'll lose our right-of-way. I believe the rational course is to preserve the right-of-way with the rails-to-trails arrangement, and if social priorities change in the future, then our options remain intact. So, if you like the song I'm singing, there's a general plan process. You missed another meeting that was simultaneous tonight on transportation planning, but there'll be another next Monday at McKinneyville. And so, we have a creative future in front of us. Let's all work together.
Thank you. Now, before I release you all, John made mention of some of the things that the League has been involved in at our luncheon last week and this forum this week. 2 weeks ago, we presented and moderated a forum for the Human Rights Commission on another issue that's quite controversial in this community, that of a law enforcement review board. That was taped by Humboldt Access and will be shown again, so if you were not able to be there, you can see that one. Tonight, we're being taped. Jesse Reed is doing this for us, and this will appear on Humboldt Access during the next few weeks. Is that correct, Jesse? In addition, we are really very busy, John. There is on May the 1st, which is a week from tonight, I believe, is that right? Anyway, May the 1st, we will be presenting Meet Your Judges with all of the judges from Humboldt County serving on a panel and answering questions from the audience, telling you what it is that the judges do and answering your questions about it. Then, starting May 5th, we have a series of 5 candidate forums for the election coming up. On May the 5th, the 1st District for Supervisors will be on Keith. May the 7th, 2nd District candidates will be in Garberville. May the 12th, 3rd District candidates will be on Keith. May 14th, 2nd District candidates will be on Keith. And on May the 15th, 2nd District candidates will be in Carlotta. So you have lots of opportunities to get more information about the candidates in the election that's coming up. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists tonight for your willingness to participate in our panel and to answer the audience's questions. Thank you all in the audience for your attention, being a very courteous and attentive audience, and submitting very good questions. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to answer every single one of them. I hope that you heard relevant information and that you've become more informed about the issue of the balanced development of Humboldt Bay. Thank you to our lead members, Amanda Windsor, Bev Post, Carol Masterson, Sarah Reed, Helen Andrews, and Jessie Reed for helping tonight. And thank you all for making democracy work.